When have you immediately understood that you're witnessing a historical moment? Saw the crash of the Concorde at Charles de Gaulle. I had just flown into Paris and was heading down the road in a taxi next to the runway. I'd never seen the Concorde take off and for a split second thought the flames were somehow normal. Then the plane fell like a brick. I remember the driver at the time saying something like "Le Concorde, c'est fini." For me it was watching the Berlin Wall fall. The joy of East and West Germans helping each other over the wall and hugging was amazing to watch. The events leading up to it were equally historical, from Reagan's speech to Gorbachev to tear down this wall to David Hasselhoff claiming credit for the wall coming down with his Berlin concert. This one gets missed all the time. Growing up with the Cold War, this was something we never thought would happen. 22nd of July 2011. A bomb went off in the Norwegian government building. Was chatting online when suddenly one of the guys started talking about hearing shots from Utøya. 10 minutes later it's on the news. The most horrific day in modern Norwegian history. I was on vacation in Sweden when it happened and I took the ferry from Oslo to Germany one day later. Me and my family had a few hours spare time in Oslo and it was so surreal. Most people are silent. Some people are crying. Roses everywhere. Whoa. On the ferry I saw a black building with all the windows shattered and thought, yeah, that's the exact building where the bomb exploded. I worked at a department store on 9/11. One of my jobs at the time was to turn on all the TVs on a big TV wall. We normally have them all set to the internal network, but the power went out that night, so they were all set to a regular channel. I had just finished turning on all of them when I saw the second plane hit, on 25 TVs all at the same time. It was surreal. I work at a TV station and on a Sunday evening President Obama was cutting into programming for an announcement. I thought aliens had made contact, but really it was about killing Osama bin Laden. Standing on the corner of Main Street and Connecticut Boulevard when a boy on a bike stopped to tell the policeman standing beside me, "The president is dead." November 22, 1963. My dad was in 5th or 6th grade when JFK was assassinated. He said that it was a normal day, when all of a sudden, the principal came on the intercom and said something along the lines of, "School is being dismissed early." Everyone was all happy and stuff, but when he got home, his mom, my grandma, was staring at the TV, and it said JFK was assassinated. I went to elementary school in Manhattan during 9/11. It was hours after the first plane hit and my school shook. We were instructed to evacuate to a nearby school basement after it was confirmed to be a terrorist attack instead of an accident. When I was outside, the sky was almost turning pink and was raining ashes and burnt office paper. Sirens echoing throughout the entire city and bouncing off every single building. My dad picked me up hours later and on the highway fleeing to Brooklyn I saw the remaining Twin Tower for the last time as it was smoldering. I watched a documentary several years ago that was 100% home videos people took when it happened. That's absolutely horrifying. It's one thing to see it on TV, but to be there. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. That plane landing right in front of my room on the Hudson River. It was the first few weeks of the spring semester of college. Holy crap, that must have been unbelievable to see. When Geraldo opened Al Capone's safe live on national TV and it was empty, I knew smartasses would be mocking that moment forever. Watching the bombing of Baghdad on TV in 2003, it got a little weird when my mom saw the US food aid shipping containers and said I helped send those there. She worked for the USDA as part of the Emergency Services Division. 2016. Front to back. This whole year seems exceptional in my view. Brexit, the coup in Turkey, new climate change directions, and the American presidential election have all been events that will directly influence our future. Also, the number of influential figures from the previous generation that have died this year. It's very surreal to watch those that led the cultural revolutions from the 60s, 70s, and 80s begin to die off. I think we're all living during a time that will be later known as the technological revolution. The time in history when computers became pocket-sized and people used them to talk absolute shite with people across the globe. The information age as it's known. This was local news, but I witnessed firsthand a plane crash that killed a dozen or so people. It was probably the most morbid thing I've ever actually experienced. It was Shoreham Air Show in the south of England. They fly interesting old planes around for people to appreciate. Everything was going as normal. This plane was doing stunts as you'd expect, and as part of the routine, it pulls into a loop. On the descent half, something looks wrong. It's descending too quickly. The plane is leveling out, almost pulling out of the loop. It disappears behind a crowd of people, and in its place a giant plume of smoke and fire launches upwards. The previously plucky commentator over the tannoy goes silent. There are gasps of shock around me, followed by a dreadful silence. After a few minutes the tannoy grimly informed us that there would be no more flying that day. I was left stunned. Everyone around me was pale-faced. I heard later that the pilot survived despite not bailing out, but one of the wings, filled with fuel, had separated in the crash and been launched onto a road access for the site. The fuel in the wing burned and probably cooked the poor bastards queuing to get into the air show in their cars. As far as I know, there haven't been any large air shows over land since then. Eastbourne did everything over the sea. The TLDR plane crashed during air show. Pilot survived. People were killed while queuing to get into the event. Shoreham, in case anyone's looking it up. The overthrow of Baghdad. A bunch of Iraqis are trying to pull down this huge statue of Saddam. They're taking turns hitting it with sledgehammer, pulling on it with chains, trading out when they get too tired to move on. Then this huge mother sucker emerges from the crowd like some kind of Middle Eastern John Henry and takes the sledge. He starts hammering away at the concrete base of the statue, make huge cracks with chunks flying off, doing real damage to the solid concrete. But after a while even he gets tired and still it stands. Then an American military vehicle pulls up, and the soldiers offer a chain to the Iraqis. The Iraqis loop chains all over the huge statue and connect them to the vehicle, and it drives, pulling the whole thing down. Everyone cheers. I remember watching that live while homesick from high school. It struck me as one of those things that, while minor in the grand scheme, was the most important moment in the lives of everyone there. I'll never forget it. And it all went downhill from there for Iraq. I remember waking up to 20+ texts, all of them asking me if I had been at Pulse that night, and if I had heard from a countless number of other people. I live in Orlando, and I'm pretty active in the community, so it wasn't unheard of for me to go to Pulse. It felt like just a local thing at first, but when I was driving around looking at houses that day, I was just watching all the foreign news sites and channels talking about people I talked to, like, every other day. That's when I realized it was historic, and not just something personal. Happening right now. Indian Gov banned the use of highest currency denominations of 500 and 1000. Millions of people across the country are queuing outside the banks to exchange them with new currency bills. Shopping malls are deserted and ATMs have run dry. I remember when I was taking a crap at my cousin's house and hearing a commercial from the other room saying I'd always remember where I was when I heard Blockbuster was getting rid of late fees. Watching Leicester City win the Premier League. In my opinion, the biggest upset in the history of sport, and I don't think something of this magnitude will be repeated ever again. This 5000-1 and they freaking won it. I doubt anything like it will happen again my lifetime. I was driving by when the Connie 2012 guy was flailing around naked in the middle of the street. No one knew who he was at the time, and it's not entirely unusual for people to get drunk and do stupid stuff down by the beach. Unfortunately, no one realized that it was history in the making at the time. So I witnessed history, but it took a few hours for the media to realize what was actually going on. When I first heard about this, I thought it meant Joseph Connie was naked. When I got in my car that morning, turned on the radio, and heard the second plane to hit the World Trade Center when Trump won Florida. For me, it wasn't when they called Trump for Florida or Ohio, but rather Wisconsin. 9/11. Cubs World Series win. Trump becoming president. Obama becoming president. Obama's speech at the 2004 DNC. He was a state senator at the time and running for US Senate. As soon as the speech was over, I said to myself, this guy is gonna be president. I didn't think it would be just 4 years later, but it seemed inevitable. I am a lifelong Republican, but I remember watching that speech. I told my grandma, That man will be our first black president in 4 years, no matter if Kerry or Bush wins. It was, objectively, one of the most remarkable speeches of our time. The Berlin Wall being torn down, the collapse of the Soviet Union, Chernobyl, Tiananmen Square massacre, the explosion of the Challenger, the launch of the internet, the attack on the Twin Towers, the overthrowing of Saddam Hussein, weapons of mass destruction, 2008 mortgage collapse recession, Brexit, Trump. I'm a result of the Berlin Wall being torn down. My dad lost his job and was pretty much forced to move back to the US. Got back together with my mom, and bada bing bada boom, here I am 9 months after. When I watched Nicolas Cage steal the Declaration of Independence. Muammar Gaddafi's death will always stick with me. I was a radio news reporter at the time. He died during my broadcast. I was handed a sheet mid-broadcast that just said Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi confirmed dead insert. Killed by rebels. I remember sitting at the desk just staring at the paper for a moment before finally getting out the words Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi has just been confirmed to have died insert. The former Libyan president is thought to have been killed by rebel forces. Thought not much is yet known. I will report back when more information is available. I was on the phone all day with political scientists, other reporters and Associated Press gathering information. It was a crazy day. Obama's inauguration. I just shut the door to my office and watched it from beginning to end. I couldn't help but feel history was being made. It was more emotional for me than him winning on election night. My high school aired it in the auditorium, and several teachers, mine included, chose to forego class and take us all down to watch it as long as we behaved. Even the 7th graders were quiet and watched it with respect. I was only 4 but I remember my mother was crying and I didn't realize the gravity of the situation at that age. But I managed to lighten her grieving because I lined up chairs, put on a fireman's hat, pretended I was like the firefighters on the news. Nowadays I realize that it was the 11th of September and my mom, who worked in the towers months before, but left to be a stay-at-home mother for my brother and me, was crying because co-workers and friends were in great danger. It's only now that I realize I was experiencing one of the great tragedies of this nation through the eyes of a 4-year-old. Not sure if this counts, but to this day the only time I felt a true feeling of what the frick is happening to this world and this changes everything. It will never be the same was when I woke up to the reports that there were several terrorists roaming the streets of Paris, killing everyone they see indiscriminately, and watching the death toll jump from 10 to 30 to 40 to well over 100. I remember being completely stunned, like a line that existed almost physically preventing people from doing such horrible things was crossed, at least in the Western world. It felt like there was nothing holding anyone back anymore, and if anyone wanted to go on a rampage and gun down as many people as they like, they could do so with hours before any meaningful response would occur. I also remember the huge death toll estimates coming in and thinking it would be like always, where they overstate it and the number ends up coming back down to an earlier estimate, but it didn't happen this time. It just kept climbing and never came back down. 1. Watching the Brexit polling results on The Guardian. 2. The moment when Trump's chances jumped from 35 to 75% on the NIT page. 3. 2014 election results in India. When President Obama was elected, I went out and bought a magazine with his face on it just to save and show to my kids one day. Seeing my dad cry as we watched coverage of John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, and Martin Luther King's assassinations. Being in Kathmandu when a series of bombs went off, marking the very early stages of the Maoist war. Most recently happening to be in Bangkok when their king passed. Compared to those, the election of Trump is a blip on the historical spectrum. When the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage, it was a landmark moment. Although same-sex marriage had been legal in our state for a couple of years, my wife and I agreed to wait until it was legal nationwide until we got married. It was awesome to celebrate that moment with my wife, kids, and friends. Knowing that my kids got to witness history was amazing. I was getting a haircut on an army base in Colorado when the Clippers stopped. I looked over at the little tube TV in the corner, and Baghdad was getting bombed. Up until that second I was holding out hope that we were just stepping up the pressure on Saddam. that this wasn't really happening, and then I was like, oh frick, this is the real deal. The fall of the Berlin Wall. I came down to breakfast, and my stepmom is bawling. Now, she's a bit of an emotional woman, and I'm a 15-year-old ignorant, so I say something along the lines of, oh geez, what is it this time, and she sobs and points at the TV. We hardly ran our TV, and especially not in the mornings. So I walk over, see the cheering crowds from last night, and knew, immediately then and there, that everything can change. I've been born and raised very close to the Iron Curtain, and although I always knew it's wrong, it also was part of my life, of my reality. To see this fundamental installation crumble is something that I like to remind myself of when the crap hits the fan yet again. I wasn't even born for either Challenger or 9/11, but I still remember being at dinner the night of the Boston Marathon bombing, listening to the live updates from the scene. With every new picture, my parents were cussing under their breath, and at one point I was certain my mom was going to walk out. When a presidential nominee's campaign website declared a cartoon frog to be a neo-Nazi racist, and the following week the ADL backed up that statement by adding that cartoon frog to the hate symbols database. That was historical. Memes were now legitimate political discourse for the first time in history. Watching the England Leave campaign gathering steam and thinking, crap, they might actually do it. Seeing the results the next day was mental. Germany destroying Brazil in the World Cup in Brazil. That was amazing to watch. Inauguration of the first black president to the United States. Being lined up, and an MTI comes over to our squadron and asks, hey, break this whole training stuff for the next 10 seconds. Any of you have family in Belgium? And knowing full well, frick, must be ISIS. Triple Crown last year, when the Red Sox won in 2004. That was big, at least in New England. Google the curse of the Bambino if you're curious. I watched Barack Obama get sworn in surrounded by kids in a local school I was a part of volunteering in. Teachers were around and some of the kids were whispering to me about why it mattered so much, explaining that a black male, becoming president of a country who's had such a tough road with racism and still does sometimes in this day and age, is a monumental testament to the power of voting, democracy and free speech. That's when it hit me. Watching the Vegas odds line for Trump go from 23% to 55% over the course of 30 minutes. No one will ever trust a political poll ever again. Standing in Fenway Park with 20k other people after the Red Sox got swept, chanting David Ortiz, then watching him walk out to the mound, take off his hat and wave to the crowd for the last time with tears running down people's faces, and 9/11, and Obama in 2008. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.